Hi, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Carrie Mendoza. We're just starting the webinar here, and it takes a few minutes for folks to file in. So as we're doing that, I just welcome you again on behalf of GenSpect and our team here at GenSpect USA. And we are very, very fortunate to have this super important topic today. Just waiting for a few more folks to file in. So get comfortable. For us in the States, it's kind of lunchtime. So okay, well, we're here today to talk about a very important topic related to boys and trans identification. You know, we've oftentimes, the young girls are sort of taking center stage with the various issues, which is super important, but we want to make sure that we are really talking about and highlighting the issues going on with boys. And I'm just so, honored and pleased to have, Dr. Joe Burgo here today, who really has spent a lot of time on this topic in various ways. Today, he has a great article out and in Colin's Substack, Reality Last Stands, and we'll put a link in for that. He also, is here to share about a new website that's up. We're going to highlight some of the issues there that really gives a lot of information on this topic. And we're also fortunate to have two parents here who are on the webinar anonymously because this is such a highly charged topic. There's so many attacks and different things on parents instead of really having an environment where they can share their information so we can help their children and all these people. So with that brief introduction, I'm going to pass it over to Joe so he can really dig in and just to let you know to put your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll get to those in the second half of the webinar. So pass it over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Carrie, and thanks for GenSpect USA for hosting us. It's been an emotional day. Everybody involved in this project has been working on it for a long, long time. I think it's hard to get across just how many hours and how many people have been involved in building this website and conducting the research and combining all the resources. It's been a huge deal. And for me also, this essay has been a labor of love, and it's been long in the making, and I'm thrilled to have it out there today. So anyway, thank you all for coming. It's nice to see such a great turnout. So as Carrie noted, the two parents here are anonymous, and I think that it's hard for people who don't have trans-identified children to understand just how fraught the situation is, and how delicate the relationship with your child can be in the midst of this political controversy. And I think that I'll hand it over first to Maria and let her tell her story a bit about, why she's here anonymously and how her son got involved in the trans movement.
Yes, thank you for having us, Carrie and GenSpect USA. As Joe said, we have been working for many, many weeks, months on this website, and each one of us has a personal story to tell. For myself, my son was a typical gender conforming nerd or geeky kid. He was diagnosed at 7 years old with Asperger's before the DSM changed it to the autism spectrum disorders. He had learning disability, and he had definitely social awkwardness and sensory processing disorder, and a host of other issues. But he was also highly gifted in certain areas. So we managed to get him through elementary school, and in middle school, we started seeing that giftedness flourish in his interests, very interested in electronics and engineering and mechatronics and robotics and all those things, participated in multiple team competitions. He was one of the lucky ones. He always had, as a parent, I always made sure that he had at least one little friend that he could do life with. And when he actually got to the middle school and particularly high school, he had a really good core group of friends many of them were on the spectrum like him. And he participated in many competitions and won a couple state championships and even participated in national championships. And, this is where, as a parent, I have a little bit of regret. My husband and I think, have some regret because we were so focused on his academic achievements and the development of his interests that we thought he would be okay. And we didn't realize that there were mental health issues and emotional issues caused by trauma and bullying that were really profoundly affecting him. He didn't want to grow up, and he didn't want to graduate from high school. So he went to college, and his freshman year of college, he was introduced to social justice, critical theories. And that was a little bit of an open door, as well as video gaming, for what eventually will become the trans pathway. He is currently in his mid-20s. He has been trans-identified for about 5 years. He's been medicalizing for about 3 years, and he is estranged from our family. And I know that Joe will talk some more with us and will fill in the blanks about our son. So we will tell you a little bit more about the website in a minute.
Okay, thanks, Maria. ML, do you want to take over?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Joe. So I think I have been our son's greatest fanboy forever. We all think our kids are geniuses, but his IQ measured at 157. He took the SAT on a lark almost in 10th grade, prepared barely for a week, and then got a 1590 out of 1600. When he joined an Ivy League university, when others were studying, hard, he found it unnecessary and ended up getting the only A+ in the course. And it was not only nerdy subjects. He kept us regaled with the social IQ of Ravens, or the Dobbs v. Jackson ruling, or the philosophy of Kierkegaard. Name it. He could talk about the exact statement that Clive Owens made to Julia Roberts in the movie Duplicity. Things like that. There were things that kept us amused for hours, and especially me. As I said, I'm the greatest fanboy. And then he ended up in an Ivy League university. He was extremely happy. That university has this, 1 week where they go out in the open and bond with each other. And he shared a card with us, the things that others have told him. For example, being your group leader this week has been amazing. You are so loud and weird and funny, and the stuff you say cracks everyone up. Or, thanks for ranting about physics and math, LOL. And there was this one comment, I really appreciate your big brain, and you had so many big brain moments throughout this week. And I was reading it this morning and I thought, yeah, but I know, I have been in awe of him his entire life. And he had his tremendous first semester. He had his friends. For the first time, he felt at home. And, he would talk to me about how he went out with his roommate just after dinner at 8, And then they started walking, and they was all around the city and ended up in a different city altogether and came back to his room at 3 o'clock in the morning. And absolutely those things that, college kids talk about when they first get their freedom. And then after the first semester, he falls in love, he says, with this girl and asks her out before the final exam because he's prepared and she is studying, and she says no, and he's embarrassed, but that's okay. The pandemic comes, he comes home, and he's cooped up at home, so he goes back to the university during the pandemic and then finds himself again with the girl and gets rejected once again. He ruminates about it for about a month, and then in April 21, he has this huge fight with this girl, and tells me, Dad, I think I'm trans. And yeah, I mean, initially his friends are supportive. They call him brave. But this is a bit of a speculation because he never talked to us about this specifically. He wants to talk all about trans because that's what excites him now. And so they gradually leave him, all those friends who were so warm to him. And by his senior year, he has exactly 0 people that he can keep in touch with. So much so that he's alone when his phone dies, and we have to buy a phone and send it to him because he can't even go to the electronic store to buy one. And he started on hormones last year, February or March. The school clinic saw him once through a licensed social worker, and he was on estradiol patches and spironolactone prescribed by a registered nurse practitioner, and has been on hormones ever since. And even though he graduated finally at the top of his class, he could not even attend his graduation. He took the final exam 2 days back. He was at home. Everybody else had jobs, 6-figure salaries. He couldn't even appear for an interview. And it's not that we wanted him to get a big job. As long as he got something in this labor market, that shouldn't have been a problem. But he just couldn't appear in an interview. He told us the year before that he wanted to go to grad school, but he just left it to me to find out all about grad school and what to do and how to apply and everything. And finally is in grad school somehow. And he thought he'd be a trailblazer there, because of his identity and not because of what he could bring as an intellectual. And people have kind of left him be. They are not interested in his identity. And he's completely alone. And I want to hold him. I want to reassure him. And there's no way I can.
Right. There's so much heartbreak in this space. For those of you who are familiar with Alistair Gunn's series of articles for Quillette, When Sons Become Daughters, written under the pseudonym Angus Fox, we're talking about a type of boy that he identified in this series of articles, and he really blazed this trail long ago, and I'm honored to call him my friend as well, but I really want to give him a lot of credit because he sketches out a profile of a boy that sounds very similar to Maria and ML's sons. We're talking about, really smart, highly gifted boys, often on the spectrum, quirky. That's the word pretty much every parent I've ever talked to uses. It's the one Alistair singles out as well. Many of them were bullied Many of them have had a hard time approaching girls and have been rejected. So we're not looking at homosexual transsexuals, right? These are boys who were, they might have been gender non-conforming in the sense that they behaved differently from other boys, but they weren't effeminate. They didn't have feminine interests. Now, the other question, and I addressed this in my essay, is, does that mean that according to the Blanchard typology, they must be autogynephiles? I think not. I think there's something else going on, but we're gonna dig into that deeper. So, ML, did you mention whether or not your son had been bullied when he was growing up?
I think there were elements of him not fitting in high school, but that was mostly due to the fact that he used to talk about things in such a different fashion than the rest of the students. I mean, I remember him coming back one day and telling us that he tried to explain calculus to his fellow students because the teacher asked him to, and they started crying because he started explaining in such a way they thought they didn't understand at all. So yeah, he was very, I wouldn't say bullied, but he just couldn't fit in. He
Right.
saw no way to, yeah.
Right, and I think that's a theme we see. I've seen, with interviewing many parents who were involved in the creation of this website, and in my own practice and in consultations I've done. Basically, that's the profile. Is they're usually highly gifted and they don't fit in. They may have been bullied, maybe not. Some of them were, like Maria's son was terribly bullied, but ML's wasn't. Maria, you said something that I want to ask you about, and I keep meaning to ask this because I don't quite understand what it actually means for your son. Is sensory processing disorders or difficulty processing sensory input? How did that show up?
Oh, very fairly early on. So he was both a sensory avoider when it came to sound, for example. But he was also a sensory seeker when it came to touch. So he was one of those little kids. I don't know if you have seen little toddlers who are touching everyone, poking, touching the walls, touching people, touching their things, constantly seeking that sensory stimulation. And yet, when it came to music, for example, he was such an avoider that he would put his hands over his ears to not listen to the music, would scream and yell for the music to stop, would go into a store or somebody's home and unplug, the CD player, because, we're a few years ago, we used CD players off the wall so that he would not have to listen to it. However, I do have to say this because I really think it plays into the profile of some of these kids too. He would do anything to get what he wanted. He was obsessed with video games, but we didn't let him play them during the school week. He could only play them on the weekends and only for a short amount of time. And when he was in the 5th grade, his teacher wanted to play Christmas music in the classroom. And he would scream and yell and cover his ears. And the teacher put him outside of the room. And I was a teacher myself. I saw him outside. And when I understood the situation, I said, that's not acceptable. So we agreed that he could earn 1 minute of video playing time if he listened to 1 minute of music. So he had a stopwatch and he would walk into the classroom and say to the teacher, okay, play the music. And that kid accumulated more hours of video playing time during the week. I mean, on the weekend, that there were hours in the week, and we had to push it off to the Christmas break. So my point is, he could get beyond his difficulty and his struggles to get what he wanted. And I see it happening right now with what he's doing too.
ML, did your son have any similar kind of sensory issues, sensitivities?
It's interesting that you say that because last year when the movie Oppenheimer came about, he and we went to see it, and there's the scene where, just after the bomb had been detonated, and people are clapping and applauding, and there's this huge amount of music coming around, and Oppenheimer cannot stay there, and he goes out. And the first thing he says after the movie to me is, Dad, that's the way I feel about noise, deafening. And I just feel like him. I could see what he was feeling. So I don't know what to make of that, but yeah. Noise was, yeah. So
for those of you familiar with autism spectrum disorder, these sorts of sensory issues are very common. I made Christina Buttons wrote a great paper about how autism symptoms can be mistaken for gender dysphoria, and I'm really indebted to her in helping me to understand what's going on here. I recommend that paper, but she points out that autistic kids typically have problems with interoception, which is understanding what's going on inside their bodies, and also with alexithymia. They have a hard time understanding and identifying what they're feeling. And I was wondering if, Maria, you could speak to that, and ML also?
Yes. This is what is so interesting. He would try to express when he was younger, a child, a middle schooler, how he felt discomfort in his own body. But he couldn't quite explain it in a way that we would understand it. But it finally made sense when we found him when he came out to us and told us that he had gender dysphoria. He had self-diagnosed himself based on the internet, and that he felt like he was a woman in a man's body. And we found a non-affirming therapist for him, and he agreed to see this person. And he allowed me to go and sit in one session a month after his declaration of, having gender dysphoria. And he explained that he said, I feel as if my arms don't fit my body the right way. I feel as if my limbs are just like in space and not attached to my body. I feel like I don't fit in the space where I'm standing. I feel as if my brain is up here. My brain is separated from the rest of my body. And I said to him, yeah, that's called interoception. And, that exactly what you're describing. And as you know, you have autism, and this is part of the spectrum. And I asked him point blank, because he said, he started out by saying, I don't feel comfortable. I've never felt comfortable in my body. And I said, what does that mean? Was it that you weren't comfortable as a boy? And he said, no, it wasn't that. And then he explained this. And I said, that's part of the autism spectrum. And he said, no, it is because I'm really a woman. And that there was no other explanation I fit. Another thing that I wanted to mention, Joe, and I had never mentioned it to you, and I forgot the name of it, but he doesn't recognize faces. He has like face blindness. Huh. So yeah, he can't, the way he describes it is he can't really see like eyes, nose, mouth, ears, all fitting in the right place of a face. And the way he recognizes people is by the shape of their body, by the way they stand, whether they have long hair or not. And I can't believe I forgot to tell you this, but yeah, he has that too. And sometimes he would confuse, like his sister would bring friends home, and he would confuse girls who were similarly shaped with similar colored hair. Yeah.
I want to come back to this, but I want to see if ML has similar experiences with his son.
Well, with our son, I think he listening to Maria, he developed a sort of a intense dislike for any perceived blemish on his body. It even went to the extent that we had to fix up a meeting with a skin specialist, and he and we went to that meeting, and he comes out after half an hour and he says, the skin specialist probably thinks I'm a hypochondriac because she said everybody has these kind of blemishes on skin. But the feeling that I got was that ever since puberty, he would have been really happy if there wasn't this body involved. This thing was kind of getting into his way of being, so to say. And if there was any way that he could, discard this body in some fashion, that would be the best possible thing. This physicality was very disturbing to him.
That's so interesting. One of my clients had a very similar sort of issue, and I remember saying to him that he needed to become more embodied when he was trying to become disembodied, and he was very disturbed by that idea, that I wanted him to, inhabit his physical form more when he wanted to take flight from it. But
Joe,
okay.
Joe, may I say something about that?
Sure.
My son was a huge D&D player and dragon master, and his avatar was a disembodied sort of sexless wave. Disembodied, like it was just kind of like a head with maybe like some hands floating around and some feet floating around, but no body. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, sorry, Joe. I was just going to jump in and on that prior comment, just about how much sort of internet, artificial world that these boys were in addition, how much you think online time plays a role in this disembodied feeling.
I think a lot, but I'd like to hear from the parents.
Yeah, definitely. My son was obsessed with the internet and with video gaming, but he was also obsessed. He had some trauma based on some catastrophic health issues that I had, that I nearly died when he was 17. And for some reason, I think the trauma that he experienced brought on depression and anxiety. And he went on this quest to diagnose himself with something. And I know this because we were concerned about depression and suicidality, and I read his journals, and he would be researching, do I have, schizophrenia? Do I have bipolar? I mean, he was just researching and researching. So sure enough, at some point, he was going to run into this topic. And when the pandemic hit, I think the pandemic was the kiss of death in terms of, their true identity just being swallowed up by the internet and these, trans groups. It was 24/7, for school, outside of school, their entire socialization became internet driven. So yes, huge factor for my son.
This is Christina Buttons says that kids on the spectrum have a vague sense that there's something wrong with them, that they're different from other people, and they will search obsessively to try and figure out what it is and self-diagnose in just the way that your son did, Maria. And then, they come across trans. I have something to say about that, but I want to hear from ML first.
Our son's obsession with the internet grew during the pandemic. I mean, he was always online, but not that much, I think. But it grew definitely during the pandemic. I mean, before, in the initial stages, he even once asked me, "Dad, what do you think is wrong with me? Why don't girls like me?" Because apparently he had asked around 8 to 10 different girls, starting from middle school even, and then culminating with this final woman in his freshman and sophomore year, and I'm guessing at some point of time when he was alone in his dorm room during the pandemic, because the classes were still being held online. There were just few of them were being allowed back to the dorm. So he was in the dorm all the time, and that's when he started looking for that, what is wrong with me? And after that, that internet usage just shot through the roof. I mean, he probably stayed online 20 hours even. Yeah. That's not an exaggeration. I mean, and there was once when my wife and I, he had gone out and his laptop was open, and there were these 4 instances of Google Chrome, each with around 40, 50 tabs open. And he was devouring information from all of them. Think of it. I mean, 150, 60 things. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm working up to a point I want to make. So when people think about autism spectrum disorder, they think about poor social skills. They think, and this is the question I want to get to, is they have a hard time reading other people. People say that they have a hard time empathizing, but Christina says that it's actually not always the case, that they just have a hard time figuring out what's going on inside of other people. And I'd like to hear from both of you about your kids' experience. Maria, you want to go first?
It's really interesting. My son was one of the most empathetic kids that I had met. I mean, he would hurt when you were hurting. He would experience sadness, but I wrote somewhere something that said something to the effect of, he said the wrong thing at the wrong time, or he did the inappropriate thing at the inappropriate time. It's not that there was an empathy or feelings. There was a deep level of that, but it was just that he didn't know exactly how to express it. For example, he would tease a friend, and it was so clear to everyone around that the friend didn't appreciate what he was saying to him, but he was either clueless to the friend not liking that, or simply too egocentric and almost like a toddler to stop. So I think it's more just a social awkwardness and not really understanding that. But the other thing too is, if he didn't think that something was important, in many ways, it was very egocentric. Once he grew up, but when he was younger, with some more of the empathy and the sympathy and all that. See, the older he got, it was more about what he wanted to do, without taking into consideration what other people wanted to do or what was important to him. So it was almost like he could turn a switch on and off. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but in terms of who he was going to be empathetic, as he got older, he wasn't into hugs. He didn't want to be hugged. And even when he was little, it was all about, I want to hug you, kiss you, overwhelm you with affection physically. I will do that, but don't you touch me because I will scream, So it was all on everything on his terms. And as he got older, we kind of saw more of that. If someone was important to him, it was deeply important to him, and he loved his friends deeply. But, as soon as his best friend cried and told him, I miss my friend. And, this new person is not my friend, then that friend was cut off forever.
ML, where was your son in terms of being able to empathize with other people and read what was going on between them?
I see so many parallels with Maria here. In some ways, he was extremely empathetic. He could read, both my and my wife's minds, for example, almost, it seemed. And then there were other times when, just like Maria's son, made a joke which the friend did not appreciate at all, and but to him it did not make any why that should be so. That did not occur at all, and I know all of this because he used to be extremely open with us, all through his, let's say, till his, even through his junior year. That's when he climbed up. And he used to talk about it, that, what is it that I said wrong, Dad? Why did she react in such a fashion? And that used to, and I used to try to explain to him, but then, at the same time, I kind of realized that from his viewpoint, something made sense and that I'm not able to catch. But he wasn't like Maria's son in the sense that he always loved affection, physical affection, as well as giving as well as getting it.
I guess the point I was trying to work up to is trying to wrap my head around, why is it? There's a well-known connection between autism spectrum disorder and gender dysphoria. It's in, 39-40% of the kids at GIDS were on the spectrum. As Hakeem says, that apart from his autogynephile patients and his transvestites, 100% of his patients were on the spectrum. And I'm okay, we can correlate that, but why is it? And I have a working hypothesis, is that, if you have a hard time figuring out what's going on inside of you and identifying your own feelings, and you're living a pretty virtual world with a lot of time online, I think you're particularly vulnerable to cognitive explanations that are detached from feeling and experience. Like, you could read something that sounds, cogent and explanatory, but it might have nothing to do with reality, but it sounds right. I think that's the way a lot of these kids discover trans ideology, is they feel like there's something wrong with them. They don't know what it is. And then they come across this explanation and they buy into it. And it doesn't really have anything to do with who they actually are or have been in their lives to that point. If you listen to the description that Maria and ML give of their kids, there's nothing gender nonconforming about these kids. So they come across this ideology and it explains to them who they are. And plus, I think Alistair says this in his paper, one of the papers. He says these kids are eager to find an explanation for why they're different, and especially one that will be acceptable to their peer group. So right now, in this particular moment, being trans is kind of celebrated, and it's, you're welcomed and called brave, rather than being an outcast and a weirdo. So I think that's a big part of the appeal. But I think the other thing we have to deal with before we run out of time to get to the questions is this whole issue of sexuality. Because, as you know, if you live in the Twitter sphere, there are a lot of people who will say they're all fetishistic perverts, and that's it. That's the end of the story. Mike Bailey has said online that these boys are adolescents and they're most likely AGP. People are pretty much holding to the Blanchard typology, and I just think that's not the case. So I want to hear from both of you about how your children encountered first manifested sexuality in their adolescence and where it's gone since then. Maria?
Yes. So, Facebook there's a point to this. Facebook is a funny thing because those time hops will remind you of the things that, your children used to say when they were young. And I would post these, what I call, childisms that he would say. And he really was so averse to anything related to sexuality until he was probably like 13 years old. He would avert his eyes when the TV showed people kissing or anything like that. He came running once in middle school. As soon as he got out of the car, just ran to me with a paper. Mom, you have to sign this paper so that I don't watch the sex education video. I have heard that there are images that you will never be able to get out of your mind. If you see them. I have no idea where he got that from. But, he was just so really, truly innocent. He was delayed in terms of sexual maturity, even though, he started growing a mustache when he was like 12. But he really was a very late bloomer. And when he really liked girls, he was obsessed with girls. When he was in elementary school, he was not inappropriate in a sexual way, but, just pulling girls' hair and saying, do you want to be my girlfriend? Can I give you a kiss and things like that. And then, as he get older, he really liked the girls, but was very shy around them. What's really sad, honestly, it's just so sad, is in that same meeting where we were with a counselor, he said to me, I have tried and tried and tried to get the girl, and it hasn't worked out. And I wish that I could be the guy who walks into the sunset with a girl in his arm, but it hasn't happened and it's not going to work. Therefore, this is what makes sense. I am a woman. Basically, if I can be successful getting a girl, I am a woman. I really do not know, because he's estranged from us, exactly where he is in terms of his sexuality. I have heard through the rumor mill that there's been all kinds of experimentation and things like that. But what's very tragic is that these boys' first experiences of sexuality are being filtered. I mean, I know that there was a girl who was, his first experience, and this happened within the trans identities. I mean, talk about getting you messed up, right? That as a boy, as a teenager, even a young teen adult, 18, 19, whatever, you can't get the girl as the boy who you are. And yet here you go, you present in this trans identity, and you have your first sexual experience with a girl who is all into, your new identity. And I think that's just really messed up.
It is really messed up. But you never saw any kind of fetishistic interest in clothing, girls' clothing before then?
None at all. I mean, Mel and I actually had a discussion about this, but he was so rigid in the way he wanted to dress that when he was little, I could not put plaid on him because plaid was for girls. Boys wore solid clothing and plaid was for girls. And as he was growing up, he would get fixated on uniforms that were just, kind of sloppy. He wasn't like a preppy dresser or anything like that. It was just, T-shirt and jeans. That was like his uniform forever. Even now, he's not he dresses very T-shirt and jeans, even now today, maybe like a more girly kind of woman's blouse, but nothing that says to you, I'm a woman.
Mm-hmm. What about your son, ML?
Well, as far as the sexuality goes, I think he kind of liked the idea of it, but the physical part of it just didn't make sense to him at all. I mean, I know that there has been some sort of sexual experiences, but nothing that he really liked. And yes, as Maria said, growing up, I mean, he hated the idea of being remotely attached with anything that could be considered feminine. Yeah, I mean, not even a shawl, for example, because that, oh, come on, feminine. Um, and dress-wise, I know he tried many things, and right now we don't know where he is in this trial thing. But I couldn't. I never really. The overwhelming feeling that I had was that he liked the idea, but the physicality of it almost made him think, "Oh, come on, I don't want to be involved in this."
Okay, so these are some of the ideas that are covered in my paper, and Carrie, I'd like to spend a few minutes before we open up to questions. If we can walk through the website, because Maria and ML have been instrumental in building this site, and I would like everybody in the audience to see what's available. There's just so much there. Do we have?
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, please do. I was going to say, please plug the website, ROGDboys.org.
Right.
I put it in the chat, the link. But please, why don't you just highlight? I mean, please talk about it for a little bit, and then maybe we can jump into some questions, because there's some great questions that are probably going to additionally pull out, some of the great points you all want to make. But
right. Yeah. I just do want to highlight the website and what's available there, because that was today is the launch of this site. So let's.
So cool.
Yes,
it's really great. Yes. Please.
So you want me to go, Joe?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So first of all, I want to say that this website was built out of a desire, a almost a desperation for the parents of boys and young men to feature them. But I want to say that the majority of us are also parents of girls. We have daughters. So we understand the pain that the parents of daughters feel for their girls, who go through this. But we hear a lot about the girls. So a coalition of us, parents, mental health experts. Joe has been amazing coming alongside of us, giving us guidance, interviewing us, talking to us. We have professionals who are experts in this field of website building, and educators, etc. We were concerned about the social narrative about our boys, which Joe mentioned. We're also very concerned about the medicalization that's happening to them. And we feel that the boys are often misunderstood and overgeneralized and kind of thrown, with the people who make the news for doing very inappropriate things in women's spaces. And we want to say, let us tell us about our boys. And we also are featuring the voices of young men themselves who have gone down this path and who have now detransitioned, or for various reasons are not able to go back to living as their sex as males, but nevertheless have regret and insight into what has happened to them. Part of the website, we have a boy profile, which we have talked about, Joe wrote about in this paper, and it's what the exchanges that we've been having. There's a section on fleeing masculinity and some of the reasons why these boys are afraid to be men. A lot of that has to do with just the messages that they're getting in the media. And I know that Joe is also exploring, that topic about our boys. One of the reasons that we really wanted to do this website is we want to change the message that says the majority of the trans-identified youth are girls. That is correct. But when we say the majority or most, that could mean 99% are girls, 1% are boys. And what we are here to tell you is that between 30 and close to 40% of those young people, the ROGD boys, the ROGD the kids and the young men who are come from the ROGD cohort are boys. That was a mouthful. For example, in the US, we have studies that show us that there is up to 29%, and then all the way to Canada having almost 37%. The detransitioner survey showed 31%. So we would love for people, professionals, podcasters, the media, for everyone to start saying that more than 30% of those who are trans-identified are boys, or that boys make up more than 30% of those who are suffering from this.
And that's all on the website. All those studies, all those numbers are linked under the tab, the numbers.
The numbers, yes. And it has the numbers for various countries. And then finally, we do have a tab for resources with parent organizations that can support parents. And we have some helpful organizations where you can get solid research and studies. And we have a section on medicalizing. So ML, if you can briefly tell us what that section is about. They need to go see it themselves because it's just so much. But if you can just briefly tell us a little bit about what kind of information they could find in that section.
I just want to jump in one quick second and just say that it obviously it's so important to highlight all those, but I will tell you as a physician, one patient who is mistreated and misdiagnosed and given treatments inappropriately it doesn't matter who they are, it's just wrong. I mean, we do need to bring up these issues, but there is the whole medical side that, of misdiagnosing or doing these checklist diagnoses, people coming to the system and just getting prescriptions after one visit. So I just want to make sure that, whether it's, 0.1%, in the medical space, when you harm one patient inappropriately, it's called a never event. And that's really, really important to understand. So, okay.
I want to mention just one more thing before ML talks about the medical part. We really were a loose coalition, not associated with any one organization necessarily when we came together to do this website, but we are very grateful to GenSpect USA for promoting us and for Carrie's generosity in doing the seminar and giving us her time. So thank you, Carrie. And under resources, I want to mention that there is a documentary done by Jennifer Lal, which is called The Lost Boys. And if you have not watched that, I really encourage you to do that. Joe, Dr. Burgo is in it, as well as 5 detransitioners and Dr. Ashakim and other voices. It just really, everything that we're talking about here, it just gives you a true picture of what these young men have gone through.
ML.
Okay. What Maria said that, or actually what Carrie said about, these people being handed out medication without, in their very first visit, and that is what happened in with our son too, for example, and that is what led some of us to essentially research this issue. Because one statement that I read in the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services is, generally an intervention is not reasonable and necessary if its risks outweigh its benefits. And when I, for example, started to look at the benefits of these cross-sex hormone treatments, among males, because that is what I was trying to find out about our son. I essentially saw that they did not exist anywhere except in some survey and online anonymous surveys, which is essentially kind of asking asking customers in an online survey, do you like our product? But if you looked at any clinical literature, even the 2023 New England Journal of Medicine paper that came out from gender affirming physicians, where they looked at 315 adolescents over 2 years, and they've observed them clinically. The abstract said cross-sex hormones work, but if you had to go into the document specifically to see that, there's a paragraph out there which says depression, anxiety scores decreased among youth designated female at birth, but not among those designated male at birth. The same thing happened, that life satisfaction scores did not become better for those assigned male at birth after cross-sex hormone therapy, which is something that they do not mention in their abstract, but they write in their paper. And that is when we found out that this is not surprising, because at least there are 2 different studies in recent years published in well-regarded journals that show that increased estrogen levels in their serum is associated with depression among males. There's a large study in Germany among older males. There's a study in Ecuador carried out by research at UC San Diego among adolescent males, and that's true.
So ML, all of these resources that you're mentioning, they're available on the website under the medicalization tab. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, and it is not that, and we were careful to say that, just believe what we are saying, but we link each and every study. So you can read it for yourself and make up your mind whether what we say is right or not. The other thing that we managed to do is that if you look at research, researchers will make a statement like cross-sex hormone treatment in male to female transsexual person reduces serum brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Okay, I'm actually reading out the headline of one of the titles of one of the papers. But what does it actually mean? What is this brain-derived neurotropic factor, or BDNF? Turns out it is a protein that is found in the brain and the spinal cord that help neurons survive and develop new ones, and they're required for learning and memory. And if there's a less of them, essentially they're associated with a risk of developing neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's or multiple sclerosis. Or there's even a risk of developing a major depressive disorder. And these are other studies that have pointed it out. It is also present in the gut, and researchers think that it is associated with the development of diabetes in later life. There are studies in recent years which talk about the risk of cardiovascular disease, and the biggest thing about the studies that we found out is that these risks, they seem to be higher than the rest of the population in the initial years, and you might think, okay, they're a bit higher, but once you look at these, once you follow these patients for many years, maybe 3, 4, 5 years or so, then the risks become dramatically higher. So let's say 50% more chance of having, blood clots, 50% higher chance in the first 2 years. Beyond 2 years, that's 5 times higher. Okay, some studies suggest 20 times higher in the samples, and this is something that is seen pervasively in the literature that has followed, the subjects for multiple years. So, for example, there's this Swedish study I'm losing my words here. The surgery, it's a comprehensive study that looked at every Swedish transsexual person that went through surgery in their mid-30s, because most of them didn't, average age was mid-30s, and they followed them over 30 years. All of them were followed. There was no loss to follow-up. All of them went through the same regimen. And all of them were receiving care from multidisciplinary specialists. And there, the first few years, it seems everybody is fine. But beyond 10 years, the risks go up tremendously. So and this is something that has been seen in the US also. So there's a study published in 2022 called Differences in All-Cause Mortality Among Transgender People Enrolled in Private Insurance. If you're a parent of a transgender child, you have nearly 1 in 10 chance that you'll be holding a dead child in your hands before they reach 50. And becomes 1 in 5 chance that you'd be holding your dead child before they reach the age 60. And these are things that you find out, we found, when you follow these patients over a longer term. You cannot find them out from a customer survey that is carried out online, or even following a sample for a couple of years. You need a longer time.
You've done an amazing job of collating all of these studies and putting it all there on the website. I mean, it's an incredible resource. Thank you so much for doing that work. I mean, really.
And it's something that, again, is a glaring, just horrible. I mean, this is what the medical community should be doing. Instead, there's basically an affirming propaganda arm that just pumps out studies that says everything's great. But as ML is pointing out, taking a deeper dive and cataloging it, it's really, there's a honeymoon period, but clearly long-term side effects, which you really can only catalog by doing studies that follow up long term. And we know in Europe that has, socialized medicine, where they have registries and they keep all the information. That's, some of the important literature to understand and look at. But what an incredible resource to shed light on the corruption of research and needing to look at high quality research. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Should we do some questions, Carrie?
Yeah. Why don't you all, kind of peruse as I have been perusing and culling and trying to answer things, that are straightforward. But we have, about 20 minutes, and then we'll leave a little bit of time to, do some closing comments and plug all our resources again. But so you guys all look. There was one here, of course, now I can't find it, but it was related to that whole idea of, sort of self-diagnosing and the need to this sort of era we're in where people feel this compulsion to have, some type of diagnosis and label to associate some feelings with, not to say that there obviously aren't true things to diagnose, but I think we're hitting on sort of this area where, these kids and vulnerable young adults don't quite fit in, and they're looking for a diagnosis. But, how do we sort of, move forward with, and Joe, I'm sure, you see this as in practicing therapy, and I see this practicing medicine where, people want a quick answer and a diagnosis and for a quick fix. But how do you navigate those conversations of just saying, hey, you know what, we don't have all the answers, and this is complicated in a world where people are answering patient satisfaction surveys, that's part of the problem with healthcare. But I'm just curious, someone kind of asked that, the sort of self-diagnosis. Yeah.
It seems to me that the self-diagnosis isn't confined to this group of young people. I mean, it seems to be just what people do now. Is like everybody has a diagnosis, which is a slash identity. I mean, I can't tell you how many kids I know who just come in and they will talk about, my ADD, or, my autism, or my CPTSD. I mean, everybody's got a diagnosis. Everybody reads it online, and they definitely build it into an identity. I mean, They lean into it for sure. It's not something shameful anymore. It used to be to have a mental disorder was shameful. Now it's like almost like a badge of honor. I don't know. What do you guys think, Maria, ML?
One thing that I would want to say is that, I read several comments from parents who said that I wish this resource existed, 3 years back, 3.5 years back, 2 years back, and my wife was saying the same thing. And one thing she said is, I wish I could, when our child first identified as transgender, I wish I could show these stories to him, what the detransitioners said, their experiences. And yeah, I feel that too. These are so raw. They are so, and you see, people in their vulnerable spaces. And that's the same thing that we feel about our son. It's like a small, frightened animal, in a corner without food. And it's almost like the animal is saying, please leave me alone. I just want to get these last moments before I die in peace. And it hurts us so much. And if only we could have shown him these stories of what people like him felt exactly the same, and they took exactly the same decision that he did, and now how they came out of it. I wish I could show them those. Yeah.
I'd like to address a really important question that I saw. I mean, there's several good ones, but someone said you're focusing only on the autistic kids. And what about, some of the other ones who are falling into this trap? And I'd like Joe actually to talk a little bit about the people like Shane, for example, who interviewed with Benjamin Boyce, and the fact that you're linking him in your story. It's not just the autistic kids, even though that seems to be our experience as parents more than any other experience.
Right. Well, if you look, there is some survey data that I talk about extensively that was gathered by a coalition of parents that are connected to this website. And yes, a lot of them are autistic, a lot of them are on the spectrum, but a lot of them are just highly gifted, like super, super smart. They're not necessarily on the spectrum. They just are a little bit different, or they're really, really sensitive. The point of all these things is that they don't fit in. I also want to say that there are AGP boys and there are HSTS boys, like there have always been. We're trying to carve out a different niche here and to say there's a different cohort that is different from what came before. Now, I think the other factor, which we didn't talk about, I think both parents have alluded to this, is these boys have also come of age surrounded by the conversation about the patriarchy, toxic masculinity, Me Too, and these are very sensitive boys who want to fit in, and they've absorbed it. That was the case with Shane, the detransitioner on Benjamin Boyce's podcast recently. Is like he wasn't autistic, and I don't think he was necessarily highly gifted. He was a competitive skier. He grew up in a hyper masculine family where competitive sport was everything. He had some setbacks when he first started dating in college. He kind of felt like he was a loser, and he absorbed all that toxic masculinity debate and didn't want to be that kind of a guy. And he'll say that was a big part of his decision to become to transition to becoming a woman. The reason why I didn't emphasize it quite so much is that I think I've overemphasized that point in prior talks that I've given, like my talk at in Denver at GenSpect was a lot about this issue, and I really want to bring in I really wanted us to bring in these other factors, the highly sensitive, highly gifted, on the spectrum boys who don't fit but I think they're all influenced by growing up in an age that demonizes men. I think they don't want to grow up to be, who wants to grow up to be the bad guy, really?
Yeah, and I also think, Joe, and for everyone who's been involved for years, and some, even longer than that, that the field of understanding has evolved. So, some of the early research on sort of these, cohorts or typical, AGP, well, we're realizing because it's complex, the internet, the school systems with these narratives, it's capturing a wider group of boys and girls that have various other issues going on. So that's why, again, the website and all the work you've done and all the work you continue to do is so important, because there's a lot of variability. And again, because this has slipped into the medical realm, because it's attached to writing prescriptions and surgeries, it's super important to educate and understand that, patients can present in various ways. And for us to be safeguarding and stopping this, we need to understand all of these elements. So again, that's why your guys' work is so, so important, because it touches on these various issues going on for boys. But that milieu that is out there is so unhealthy. And folks who've been working on school system issues know that. I mean, I have 3 boys, and when I first heard these things going on in school, talking about toxic masculinity, I like, you're not going to talk to my kids like that, because that's abusive. So, but yeah.
There's a question I would like to address.
Sure. Yeah.
I think Lisa had to sign off, but Lisa Sellen Davis asked, how is the population of boys substantially different from ROGD girls? Because she says they sound similar. They're bright, quirky, perhaps on the spectrum. I think the big difference is that they don't cluster. What Lisa Lippman identified was that geographically they tend to show up in clusters in friend groups in the same schools. That's not the case with the boys. These are loners. These are lone wolves.
That's such an interesting point. Even with network effects of gaming and all those things, you're not really. It's interesting.
I think Maria could talk about her son's friend group, they were all like him, right? And they didn't then start trans identifying when he did, right?
No, absolutely not. It devastated them. But one thing I want to mention where I think it's different between the boys and the girls, and again, this is not universal, but it does speak to, quite a few of our experiences, is that the girls tend to transition socially earlier than the boys. So, for example, the girls will start wearing, boy clothes and cut the hair off and all that, whereas some of the boys, in fact, a number of the boys are desperate for those hormones early on because they want to see the changes before they actually come out. I mean, we actually have a story of some parents whose kids literally have not come out to like the extended family because they want to have the surgery before they come out. And I think that might be different than what the girls do. Some of these boys stay hidden until they actually start seeing some changes in their body, and then they want to come out.
That's such an interesting observation and important to know. I wanted to make sure we got, because we're closing in, there was one in here, about this problem that's so heartbreaking, the pulling away from your nuclear family or other support system, and Joe, what you suggest, how parents or loved ones in that person's life manage that, because it's just really complicated and hard. It's like, do you take a hard line so you feel like that's the right thing to do, saying no, not do this, or it's asking a parent to disassociate from their child is like an unbelievable ask. So the parents feel caught between a rock and a hard place. So it's always just so hard to answer what to do, how to manage that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
It's really upsetting. I wish I had an answer. It's absolutely heartbreaking because, it used to be that parents had some kind of authority, and they could influence their children because they were this authority. And what do you do in a world in which all the school and all of the institutions, social media, everything around the child is telling them something different from what you think they need to hear? Sometimes it just feels hopeless to me. And I think that Marie and ML can speak to their trauma in confronting this situation and what the difficult decisions they had to face.
With
Yeah,
that,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Maria.
Well, there's different ways. I would say if you have a child at home, I mean, there's different ways that you deal with a teenager still under your roof than you do, with a young adult who can do whatever he wants to do. And you literally, you hope for influence, but you have zero control pretty much. But for the younger ones, and I don't know if I'm looping to some of the questions that I saw on the scroll, but I would say the most important thing is to control the internet, because they may be, you can't control, if they're in school, you can't control the influences they're going to get in school. But as we know with the boys, they don't cluster. So a lot of the influence is going to be either the internet or sometimes a female cheerleader, which is, a friend who is pushing them and encouraging them to do this. So that would be important. And one of the things that Stella O'Malley and Sasha, recommend in their writing and gender awareness, and it's in the GenSpec website too, is that you expand their world. So they want to make it all about gender, but you want to pull them, kind of a wider view of life, where you're forced fun outdoors and doing things as a family and pulling them away from, that narrow perspective. That would be it. I mean, for the young adults, honestly, for our family, we've chosen to live in biological reality. And that's the reason our son is estranged. I mean, he knows we love him and he can always come back. And I mean, he doesn't have to come back as a detransition man. He can come back as himself, as long as as he is right now, as long as he understands that we're not going to treat him like he's our daughter, pretend that he's our daughter, because that cognitive dissonance literally would cause us a moral injury. I mean, it would kill me if I had to live in that delusional world. So, I mean, it is hard, but honestly, we focus on our other child, on our grandchild, and other activities, and being with parents who are going through the same thing has been very helpful.
Can I just underscore, before you go to ML, can I underscore what Maria said is Stella O'Malley and Sasha Ayad both run parent coaching groups. Lisa Marciano does something similar. These women are amazing resources, and I think the parents, if you're looking for guidance, I would reach out to any one of them. ML?
I mean, I can only look back as to what we would have done different 2 years back, 2.5 years back. And the only thing that I can think of is that if we knew everything that we know today, is try to empathize more from his point of view, trying to understand the trauma that he thinks he's going through from his point of view, and then come out with a solution rather than suggesting something to him straight away. And seriously speaking, if we knew all of this that we know today, especially in what I call as a post-CAS world, and all this information about this bogus research that has created consensus when there is nothing known really, I think we would have done a much better job. But the thing that we should have really done was to show that empathy, trying to understand his point of view better.
I do want to say those are great tips and information from your personal experience, but I want to say that, you know, it's easy to look back and go, oh gosh, I should have done this or that. I think that, you know, both of you and all these parents listening should know that you did the best you could at the time with what you're dealing with. This is very, very complicated. And there's all these societal changes that are going in the wrong direction. And so again, your website and everything you've done are just an amazing, you know, product of taking these personal difficulties and tragedies and putting it into something positive to help other people. You know, so that is amazing. So quickly, oh yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, that's correct. If we had these resources, I mean, even if they were, you know, like the IKEA help sheets, even that would have helped. We were blind.
Yeah. And right. There's so much great work. Sagam's got amazing resources, so many people. So you're right. And we want to be disseminating that out there. I know we're getting close towards the end. I want to be mindful. There's unbelievable 40 plus questions, so many great ones. And we're not gonna be able to get to all of them. But you know, you can reach me at carrie@genspec.org, and then also Joe and the folks at the website will make sure that information's disseminated. But there is a question in here about, you know, suicidality, specifically, you know, the typical pathway in our country in the US is that, you know, you get sent to the emergency department, you know, to be on a mental health hold when you're suicidal. And, you know, people have concerns. Are they going to be treated fairly or objectively, I should say, because there's so much bias going on in the healthcare system. And I get calls fairly routinely from people like, well, where should I go? I'm scared that if we go to X hospital, they're going to affirm instead of saying what's going on with my you know, loved one. You know, are they going to consider that the hormones and other things are part of the problem? So I'm sure, you know, you all have dealt with, you know, different issues dealing with, you know, universities and all that. That's probably, you know, a topic for another webinar. But I do think that what I've learned is, even though you have when they're young adults, you know, if they're still on your health insurance and things, there's still things that, you know, you can do. So I think learning what your legal rights are, but knowing that when you go into the healthcare system, trying to find, you know, trusted people that will guide you the right way, I do think is super important. That's getting off a little bit on tangent. So I don't know if you all.
Oh, wait,
yeah.
On that note, can I just put in a plug? Is everybody aware of Therapy First?
Yes.
Therapy First is a organization it's a collection of over 300 therapists now who do not affirm, who are committed to exploring the psychodynamics or however they work of what's actually going on, rather than just accepting this trans identification. So there's another great resource. Therapyfirst.org.
So
these
important.
Resources are mentioned on the website.
Okay. Yep. So important. There are, you know, help. There is help out there. So that is so important. I don't know if there's any low-hanging fruit questions you guys want to quickly peruse before, or maybe just do a few, you know, some closing comments, because we've got about four minutes.
Well, Corina asked if there were resources for the dads of ROGD Boys. And I mean, we have, if you are a member of PROGD, Parents of Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria, there are a couple support groups specifically for parents of boys that includes, you know, dads and moms. And we have a few dads, including, you know, one of the dads who was here today.
Okay. anything else you see there, Joe or ML?
Well, I'm just answering a couple, like
Oh,
by
okay,
typing out
okay,
the answers.
Well, I'm gonna just remind people again. I sound like an infomercial. ROGDboys.org, because it is really fantastic. Also, Joe has a great essay released today in Colin Substack, Reality's Last Stand, that he's grown to quite a great following, and it's just great examples of like the talent and energy and positivity around educating people, raising awareness, and connecting to people who are really trying to help solve the problem. Therapy First, of course, was mentioned. Joe, you're out there.
GenSpect.
Oh yeah. Yeah, GenSpect. I mean, Stella's got, created like a worldwide movement, and I'm now on their team helping in the US, because we're a beast of our own, especially going into an election year. And then we've got a great conference coming up in Portugal, so you got to go to the GenSpect website, and please sign up for that virtually, or it would be awesome to be in person. And we're going to have more in-person things through GenSpect, and more on this topic. We're looking into doing more of a series to really take a deep dive into the different elements. And GenSpect is credentialed to offer continuing medical education now. So we've got some programming coming up, including we can make this into a CME that folks who need that will be able to then watch this and get educational credit for it, which is super important. I need to reach out and get more physicians and nurses and all folks who write prescriptions and are part of this chain that ends up medicalizing, this mental health issue. So that's Joe, did you want to?
I just want to thank you and GenSpect USA again, and there was a great turnout. Thank you all for coming.
Oh.
And I'm sorry we didn't get to answer. There was a whole bunch of great questions. We ran out of time.
Yeah. Yes. So yeah, please email me at carrie@genspect.org. And Joe, do you want to give them the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to reach me is with my email, which is joeburgo@gmail.com. I have a website, but it's kind of inactive. I'm mostly on Substack, but joeburgo@gmail.com.
Yes, and please follow us on Twitter.
Oh, yes.
I put it on the chat. Is ROGD_boys_exist. And then if you tweet about us, use the hashtag ROGD_boys_exist. We have to put the underscore because otherwise it says ROGD boys sexist.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, everyone follow that Twitter handle, and we will be in touch about future programming soon, and this recording will be up. So thank you everybody very much. We're going to sign off.
Thank you, Carrie.
Okay.
Thank you, Carrie, so much.
Okay. My pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.